It's your 1-year anniversary on your policy, and once again you've had a year of perfect driving. There are so few Californians who take their responsibility as seriously as you do. You're exactly the reason we're able to offer these low rates. And we want to be sure that we can continue offering them at this low level, or lower them for that matter, and that's why we want to be sure we don't just insure anybody. So congratulations on having an excellent, excellent driving record. Among your friends, we'd love to offer these rates, but only to people who are also outstanding drivers, who are the first people for that matter, and that's why we want to be sure we don't just insure anybody. So congratulations. A couple of names that come to mind for you of individuals who drive low-risk vehicles, who take their responsibilities seriously, who would never drink and drive, for example. We'd love to give them the same level of service and the same low rates we offer to you. I said, Pete Schweitzer. Well, do you suppose Pete Schweitzer then called me up and said, "The nerve! George, you gave my name and number to that insurance company and they called up and lowered my rates by 30%? How dare you?" Of course not. He was thrilled. I was delighted to be their customer. I was happy to spread the savings to my friend. It created a positive outcome for him and also for the insurance company. But let's take that call apart. They didn't say, "Well, we're on a referral campaign and we've gotten up to the W's." No, they started off by giving credit where due. That is, they identified the first step to gathering referrals is to give credit where due. They identified what was it that made me a good customer. Okay, do any of you have customers you wish you didn't have? Okay, don't ask them for referrals. Their friends will all be just like them. You don't want them. But let's suppose you decided for once and for all that you really would go capture referrals. Let's say you just decided to identify your top 10% of your customers. Maybe it's the people who always pay on time, who are a pleasure to deal with, who trust your advice and judgment, who make good decisions, the people who value your relationship. If you identified the profile of what makes for your top tier of your very best customers, wouldn't it make sense to call them and say, "You are among my very best customers. What I notice and appreciate about you is that you're always punctual with your payments, you're a pleasure to deal with, you're always friendly, you return my calls, you give me ideas that help us grow. You're exactly the kind of customer we would love to have more of." Start by offering credit where due. Second step, as with 20th Century, be specific about who you're after in terms of referrals. Not, "Gee, can you think of anybody who would be a possible customer for us?" No, what they did with me is say, among your friends, who are the first couple of people who come to mind when you think of very safe drivers who would never drink and drive, who take their responsibilities seriously? In other words, it's kind of a fill-in-the-blanks approach. You tell your current customers what you love about them and what you wish you had more of in others, and let them fill in the blanks. And the third step, and this is an important one, is to make sure that as you ask for these referrals, you provide some appreciation or incentive for doing so. In my case, they explained that my rates would stay low if they could make certain that they insured other policyholders like me who were low risk, who were probably never going to file a claim. Point out why it is in your customers' best interest to have them supply you with referrals so you can continue to grow your business with customers like them. Power talkers are people who give credit where due. I'd like you to write 3 R's in this section of your notes, please. 3 R's, because my company name is Speaking from Experience. I view my role with you here today is that I go through my life paying attention to the experiences that happen to me, looking for lessons I can learn from them, looking for how can I write a story about this, how can I explain it to an audience, how can I, as a typical customer, how can I say what affects me positively, what can I pass along to others. And so I'm paying attention. I use what I call the 3R system. First R. I recognize what impresses me positively as a customer. For example, I was speaking to a dental group in San Diego not long ago, and I had a suit pressed just before the presentation. I went to pick it up, and the individual, Okay, you go to the dry cleaner, you know, there's that automatic conveyor belt thing that brings your clothes around, and then they punch in the number, and it comes around to your suit or your dress, your garment, and they take it off the hook, and then usually right by the cash register there's a little bar, kind of like a closet bar, and they hook it on there, and they ring you up, and then you take your clothes. This guy in San Diego, though, I noticed that as he took the clothes off the rack, when he went to that hanger bar, he turned it around and hooked it from the back. And I thought, wait a minute, he's doing that to make it easier for me to lift them and go. And I noticed what he was doing, I recognized it, and I rewarded it, because I said, hey, I see what you just did. Of all the times I've been to a dry cleaner, I've never before had somebody do that. You took the extra trouble to turn that hanger around and hook it so that it would be easier for me. Wow, thank you. That guy almost started crying. I'm not kidding. He said, oh, you know, and he happened to be of Arabic descent, and he had a heavy accent, and he said, I do this for all my customers. Nobody ever noticed. Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you. It was like we were going to hug each other that he had turned the hangers around. Recognize excellence in others. 2, reward it on the spot. 3, report on it. What I'm doing with you. I went to my audience and I reported it, and it happened to be a dental audience, and some individual said, hey, you know, when we have new patients come in, we have a new patient form. What if I put the new patient form on a clipboard with a pen and turned it around and handed it to them with the pen? Would that make them feel better? Absolutely! What a tiny adaptation. You could say, well, the dry cleaner does that. Why couldn't I do something similar to make my patients or my customers feel that much more welcome? Recognize excellence in others. Reward it in them, and report it to those around you, and see how you can incorporate it into your own business. Power talkers are people who give credit where due. When they notice things going right, they notice it, and they decide to do something about it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to find out, are any people here people who have private pilot's licenses? Anybody ever take flying lessons? Okay, good. Quite a few of you. I'm also a pilot. And I want to tell you about a flight experience I had on June 16, 1996. I kept a Cessna 182 at a small airport in Seattle, and it happened that this is the airport where Boeing builds all 737s and 757s. It's the Renton Airfield. And I kept my airplane there, and on that particular day, I went flying with 2 people I had not met before, because I had made a donation to a charity auction, the Starlight Foundation, AIDS critically ill kids. And you know, the auctioneer says, and your pilot will take you and a guest sightseeing in the San Juan Islands, which is in the far northwest part of our country. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful part. It's near Seattle. It's very close to Victoria, British Columbia, just a cluster of lovely islands. And so that particular day, I went to the airport, I walked across the tarmac, and walking toward me was a guy, mid-50s, gray mustache, gray hair, a real twinkle in his eye. He was obviously excited about going flying. His name was Pete Buck, and I welcomed Pete aboard. Pete was an attorney in Seattle, and he had been the winning bidder. In fact, a very persistent bidder, because no matter what anybody else bid, Pete always outbid them. He wanted that flight. With him was his fiancée, Jean. Jean was a dentist, and Jean looked about the way you look if you're walking into her office for a root canal. You could see she did not like this whole idea of going in a small plane. So I welcomed them. I got them seated in their side of the plane. I came around, walked around the prop, and got into. Pilot's always sitting here, and I thought, well, Jean looks a little nervous, so I'll lighten things up. Now, as a pilot, you always give a safety briefing to your passengers, whether you're commercial or private. And I said, now, Jean, if at any point I should slump forward and stop breathing, don't worry, Pete can just press this red button and say, help, the pilot's dead! And someone will talk you down. Pete will land the plane. It'll be okay. Now, and Pete, should we land prematurely, you'll want to raise this lever so you can pop that door open and get out of the plane. And it was a perfectly beautiful day. We took off from Renton, and Jean thought that we were going to go sightseeing. But Pete had a secret plan, because June 16th was the day they had met 1 year earlier, and they had met on this little island, San Juan Island, and specifically at a yacht harbor called the Roche Harbor Resort that had a little airstrip beside it. So he thought his surprise was, for their anniversary, he'd have me fly to the place, as he put it in legal parlance, the scene of the crime, where they had met. I thought this was a wonderful plan. So we took off, perfect flying conditions, reached cruising altitude. I flicked on the automatic pilot. We're flying along, and it was spectacular. I'm going, Gene, if you look over your right shoulder there, that's Mount Rainier behind you, over 14,000 feet. Pete, look, up ahead there, that's Mount Baker. These two mountains have more glaciers on them than any other mountainous area in North America outside of Alaska. It was fantastic, sparkling, beautiful weather. As we approached Roche Harbor, I went through my pre-landing checklist, fuel mixture 10%, flaps 10, checked everything, all's well, flicked off my autopilot. And I heard a voice. Don't land there. Who's that? What's that? And I looked, Pete and Gene didn't seem to have heard this voice. And I thought, well, that's kind of creepy. And I checked my gauges. Everything was just fine. I felt fine. I thought, I'm not the kind of guy who, my life is not ruled by voices. And so I did what you pilots know. I made my turn to left base and then my turn to final, the last thing before landing. And as I made my turn to final, I heard again, don't land there. I thought, God, I've never had that happen before. That's weird. I thought, well, maybe I should change and go to another airstrip. How would I explain that? Pete, don't worry, I feel fine. As you can see, the instruments are all in the green. The weather's perfect. Everything's okay. I want to let you know, I'm hearing voices. You don't like your pilot from the cockpit today. Ladies and gentlemen, we're approaching Detroit Airport. I'm hearing voices in the cockpit. I think we'll go to Minneapolis. So I decided to continue with the landing, and we were on short final, which is just before you actually touch down, before the threshold of the runway. In fact, the beginning of the runway was about as far as from here to the back of the auditorium. And at that moment, we encountered a phenomenon that the pilots in the room know about, and which you encounter yourself without knowing about it, and that's called wind shear. Wind shear is a vertical wind. You can't see it, you can't do anything about it. And in fact, you encounter wind shear all the time as you're flying, because you're going along at 33,000 feet and suddenly your coffee jiggles a little bit. Well, that's wind shear. The plane may be bumped down 50 feet. You're at 33,000 feet, no big deal. But we were at 33 feet. And when you go down 50 feet from 33 feet, it's a big deal. And suddenly, it's like an elevator, the cable is cut or something. Suddenly, the plane's on the ground, and while you're flying, you're steering with the yoke. But when you're on the ground, the yoke does nothing. You steer with your feet. And I'm struggling with the foot pedals to keep the plane going straight because I can see the end of the runway there. We're going to make it. If I can just keep it going straight, and we're bouncing along over the little bumps, and there's grass sticking, and I can tell you, the weirdest thing in emergency situations, I had these three predominant thoughts in my mind. For some reason, I was thinking, first, I was like, oh, fine, I'm going to get grass stains all over my plane now. And then, of course, I also thought, why didn't I listen to that voice? And third, I thought, and why did the winning bidder have to be a lawyer? I do not want an attorney on my plane when I'm crashing. Still, I was able to keep the plane straight. We were bumping along, just heading right for the runway. We were just going to... And then I saw the ditch. And the landing gear, the nose gear, dropped down into the ditch, sheared off the bottom of the plane. If you have no landing gear, you're not in control. We slid down the runway on the belly of the plane. That particular model, the Cessna 182, has its carburetor on the bottom side of the block, so that was the first thing to be sheared off. So now my 55 gallons of fuel spilled out on the runway. Sparks are flying. Well, you know what happened next. Plane came to a halt. Cockpit filled with smoke. Fortunately, Pete had listened carefully to his instructions. He opened the door and got out with Gene. We ran from the plane and stood back and watched. And when the sheriff arrived and pulled his Instamatic out of the car, that was my Cessna 182. It's all that was left of it. Total loss. Insurance company paid for it. I'm very happy to tell you, not a scratch. We didn't have a singed hair. Perfect survival. Nothing bad. But man, did I learn some lessons that day. For one, you better believe I listened to that voice. The book I'm working on now is Gut Level Leadership, and it helps males primarily. Women, you know this already. us dumb guys think, it has to be logically verifiable to be true. No, it does not have to be logically understandable at all to be true. People who make the best decisions in business and in life are people who check with their gut. What is my gut telling me to do? I learned that lesson. I certainly learned the lesson about the big picture, like don't think about grass stains, control the plane. And I also learned something about judging others. Because I was so worried about Pete Buck, thinking, oh gosh, now we've survived the crash, but now I can just see the lawsuits. What's going to... Emotional damage, failed marriage, dry cleaning for his pants. I know it's not going to be misrepresentation because the auctioneer did say, this will be an experience you'll never forget. I know it's not that. Hey, I was so wrong. This guy, Pete Buck, is a fantastic person. He didn't sue me. He invited me to the wedding. Their wedding video begins with this picture. I was with him for 4th of July this last year. I go every year. They come to all my parties. We've become more than great friends. I think there's something about a life bond going on here. I was so wrong about Pete. But I also learned something about failure. Because I certainly left that experience feeling that I had failed as a pilot. You're not supposed to have your plane burn up. And I'm so grateful to your hometown boy here, Henry Ford, for reminding us of what failure really means. Failure is the opportunity to begin again more intelligently. In fact, the auditorium next door where the losers are, they fail a lot less than winners fail. Because when losers fail, they step back and they say, oh, I'm never doing that again. I'm no good at that. I'll never do that again. Winners have an experience like this and say, oh, there are lessons in there that I can learn. In fact, one of the distinguishing characteristics of winners in life is that they encounter failures and recognize that in them lie the greatest lessons they can learn. And in fact, you hear it in their language because power talkers exhibit the third trait, which is that they rebound resiliently. They bounce back. Do bad things happen to successful people? Absolutely. More bad things happen to successful than unsuccessful people. Unsuccessful people encounter a bad situation dealing with collections or selling or emotional customers, and they go, oh, I'm not good at that. I better not do that. Winners encounter the same situation, and instead of saying, I failed, I'll never do that again, they say, okay, there's a lesson here. What can I learn from this experience? What shall I do differently the next time I approach such a situation? How can I extract from this great meaning that I can take forward in my career and in my personal life? Failure is what helps to shape the most successful people. Power talkers rebound resiliently. If you hear someone saying, if only I had, you know that's not a winner. The winner says, starting now, I will. Power talkers rebound resiliently. Okay, I'd like you to stand up, please. And while you're standing, would you give yourself a little neck massage here? Scalp and neck. Because here's an intellectually challenging part of the evening. Because, hey, until now, has everything I've said made sense? Yes. You know this. This is not academic. Yet, there is a scientific foundation for what we're talking about. And while you're standing for a moment, sit down whenever you'd like, but as you remain standing, I want to explain the intellectual, the scientific background. And I will particularly invite these people to sit down so we can see what's up on the screen. I want to introduce you to one of our nation's preeminent psychologists, Dr. Martin Seligman. He's written several books. They are great. I recommend them all. In particular, I'll recommend the book Learned Optimism by Dr. Martin Seligman. Fantastic person. Here's Dr. Seligman's approach. It's called cognitive restructuring. And in fact, okay, how many of you are clinically depressed? Okay, of course you wouldn't admit it. There are two very effective treatments for depression. One is a pharmaceutical approach, and drugs really work well with depressed people. So long as they take the drugs. They stop taking the drugs, they're depressed again. Cognitive restructuring is different. Cognitive restructuring does not involve any drugs at all. It involves a counselor helping you to redefine the way you view the experiences that have happened to you in life. It works wonders because you don't need to take drugs, and it has a much more persistent, a much more lasting effect. Here's the way it works. An individual, you and I and the people next door, all have an explanatory style. That is, a habitual way of speaking, a way of describing what goes on. And there are three measures of your explanatory style. The first has to do with what I'll call the first P, pervasiveness. Global and local are the two extremes. So, for example, in my plane crash, I could say, oh, everything's going wrong for me. I crashed the plane, I'm in bad health, my family's falling apart, I'm experiencing financial difficulties, now I've got a lawyer after me, all kinds of bad things. Or I could use local and localize it and say, well, yes, I did crash this plane. However, I'm in good health, we all survived, this person seems like the kind of guy who's not going to make my life miserable. I have a wonderful child. My life is going well. Yes, I crashed the plane, but it's only that one thing, pervasiveness. The second scale, which I'll call the second P, has to do with personalization, your role in the experience. I could crash the plane and either say, it's because I'm terrible at everything I do. I can't fly a plane. I'm lousy at everything. Or I can say, now what are the factors that brought about this crash? The NTSB report that you can see on the internet now says that there were unpredictable winds and that there was a contributing factor, was an uneven runway surface at the advance of the threshold. There are lots of reasons this happened. Certainly I had a role. It's not a matter of dodging responsibility. It's where are you on that scale? Is it everything because of me, I'm a bad person, or is it because there were external factors that contributed to it? And the third scale has to do not with time, not with person, but instead with permanence. How long is this going to be around? Is this condition, I crashed the plane, I do everything wrong. Things always go wrong for me. I'm a loser in every area of my life, and I've always been a loser, and it's because I'm a rotten person. Or it can be unstable and say, well, things usually go right for me. This one instance didn't work out quite right. Now here's what cognitive restructuring is about. It's helping people move from one end of the scale to the other. So that if we deal with people who are in a situation where things go well, the losers, pessimists, and the optimists have completely different ways of describing what happened. For example, the optimists, when things go well, say they are at the global end of pervasiveness. Not only did I win the sales contest, but I've got a great personal relationship, I have kids, I'm in good health, I'm doing well financially, life is rosy. They say, because I planned well and worked hard, that's why I won the sales contest. This is no lucky fluke, I brought this about. And things are going to continue to do well. I'll always do well in my life. On the other hand, next door, when things go well, the pessimist says the opposite end of the scale. Oh yeah, this one thing went right. Yeah, I won the sales contest, but the rest of my life is a mess. And it's certainly not because I was a good salesperson. It was because the really good salesperson was sick that month, or something, my territory was changed. It's not me, something outside brought this about. And I'm sure this won't continue. But what about when things go poorly? When negative things happen, we and the losers have a completely different language pattern. When things go poorly, optimists say, well, it's just that one thing. In other words, they localize it. They identify, yeah, I crashed the plane. However, I'm in good health. I have a wonderful relationship with my child. Financially, I'm doing fine. I have good friends. Yeah, one thing went wrong. Not everything. One thing went wrong. And there were circumstances that brought this about. Yes, I had a role, and I can change the way I play the hand I'm dealt. But there are other factors to consider. It's not because I'm a rotten person. And I'm sure things won't stay like this forever. The optimist says, yeah, once in a while things don't go the way you want. On the other hand, in the other auditorium where the pessimists are, they have a completely different way of viewing things. When things go poorly, the pessimist says, oh, everything's bad in my life. Not just this one thing. Sure, I lost the sales contest, and my health is declining, and my friends don't like me, and everything is wrong. And it's because I'm no good. It's internal. And it's gonna always be this way. Cognitive restructuring is about changing where you are on the scale. It's about consciously saying, as a doctor to a patient would say, now hold it, what you just said, you said you lost the sales contest because you are not a good salesperson. Are there some other factors here? Well, yeah, territories were realigned. Yeah, well, there is a tough economic environment right now. Well, yeah. So, in other words, the cognitive restructuring approach to people who are depressed is to say, let's shift your language to the other end of the scale. And in fact, with a very high reliability, Dr. Seligman or anybody who studies this field could listen in on you talking through the day to friends and to yourself and put you on the scale of optimist or pessimist, and you can change it. You can move. In fact, what I'm sharing with you tonight, these verbal strategies for improving the image you project to others, your ability to get cooperation from them, and the ability to motivate yourself, is all something that you can do. Now, I said there are 9 trait areas. And for each of them, we're looking at some examples. I certainly don't expect that this evening you go, oh, well, I heard some stories, and I'm going to quit saying I'll have to, and I'll always say I'll be glad to. How about problem? Instead of saying problem, gee, that makes me want to back away from things. If I run into a customer's challenging situation, I feel better than if I run into a customer's problem situation. Problems I go away from, challenges I move toward. Oh, I could change that. Instead of saying, I can't get you the report till Friday, I could say, I can get you the report on Friday. You could make lots of individual changes. But there's a big difference between simple and easy. It's not easy to change lifelong habits, obviously. Hey, don't make this mistake. Don't make the mistake of sitting in your chair and seeing me up here saying, oh, Mr. Author guy, he's learned these 50 things. No, I work on this every day. Last night, my flight arrived here just past 10 o'clock. I had my Yahoo map directly to the address on Franklin, where the Embassy Suites is, over on Franklin here. And just about 7 or 8 minutes after 12, I was at a mobile station with very thick bulletproof glass near Franklin in downtown Detroit, wondering why were all these young children out after midnight. And I was completely lost, and I handed my little map to the lady under the, the little place you slip the money through, and I asked, Embassy Suites, where's Franklin? It's got to be close here. I followed the directions. She's, Embassy Suites? And she looked completely baffled, never heard of Embassy Suites. I immediately thought, oh, God, she's obviously never been anywhere. She's stupid. I didn't think, maybe I'm in the wrong place. And then a rather disheveled woman who you wouldn't pick out walking down the street, there's a smart, capable person, I'll ask her. But she saw me with this map, and she took the map and started saying, oh, okay, now, oh, you know what you'd have, let me see, how would you get to Franklin here? And I'm thinking, okay, just humor her, she doesn't know. And then this really big, mean-looking guy comes over, takes one look and says, that's in Southfield. And she says, so what, do you work for the post office? And he said, yes, I work for the post office. It's in Southfield. And that woman got out her pencil and made me a little map that got me directly to Embassy Suites last night and basically saved my ass. So I found myself driving over here thinking, if only I had checked the zip code. And I go, oh no, wait a minute. If only I had, no. Starting now, I will. Whenever I'm flying into a city that I've not been to recently, I'll check the zip code. And I also thought, At the rental counter at the airport, I showed the map to the dollar rental guy. I said, does this make sense to you? He looked it over. Yep, that looks good to me. But how could he have let me go the wrong way? I thought, hold it. It is not his responsibility. It's my responsibility. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, don't think that because I wrote the book and I give the speech that I've got this down. I work on it every day. Being a power talker does not mean, okay, there are 50 things, don't say that instead. I've mastered them, now I'm a power talker. No. It means that you decide every day to pay careful attention to the impact that your words have on others, on the image you project to them, on the level of cooperation you get from them, and on how they will affect you. Power talkers decide to take charge and to use their language, their daily interactions with others, to create the most positive outcomes they can. Being here tonight is a wonderful step in that direction. And it's a long time journey. It's simple changes, it's not easy changes. Also, during the break, several people said, oh, gee, do you still fly? And it's kind of an interesting situation. First of all, I didn't tell you the whole story about that crash. Because there were actually 4 passengers on board. My 6-year-old daughter was on board. One of the things I learned in that experience, when Pete got out with Jean, I, of course, grabbed my daughter from the back and pulled her from the plane, and we ran away. I was very interested in sort of watching myself outside my body, looking at how I handled it, and it was amazing to me that I didn't feel my heart was racing, I didn't feel in any panic, I felt absolutely calm and cool. I thought, this is odd. The one sensation I noticed physically is that I had an unquenchable thirst. My mouth was so dry. And people came out from along the airstrip and gave me gallons of water. No matter how much I drank, I was still thirsty, my mouth was still dry. Yet, I didn't panic. I didn't in any way fall apart until I put my daughter to bed. When she was in bed, I knelt down beside her bed and I cried all night long. And I guess partly it was that I wanted her to see her dad being strong in an emergency situation. I knew that for me to freak out was not going to make anything any better. But when I knew she was safe in her bed, man, I just cried all night. Another thing that came out of that experience is that at the time I was going through a divorce. My former wife, we had shared custody at the time, and naturally Mom freaked out. Her daughter, I don't think she minded that I almost died, but her daughter. And so I made a solemn promise that I would not take Kelsey in any small planes. Subsequently, my former wife decided to leave the country. And I had an opportunity at that time to either become a visiting, summer vacation dad or a full-time dad. And I paid attention to that voice inside me that said, the most important thing I will ever do in my life is raise this child. And I am so grateful. Thank you. You parents know why you're applauding, is because not only is the most important thing for the child, it's been the best thing that ever happened in my life is to be a full-time dad. Well, because I had made the promise to not take my daughter in any small planes, when I subsequently became her custodial parent, if I can't fly with my daughter, I ain't flying. You can't dabble at flying. You better do it all the time and keep it up. And so it was out of the question. So now I ride motorcycles. Gotta do something fun. And it's interesting how we get our lessons in life. Partway through the process of writing the book on which this evening's program is based, and which some of you are getting at the table, partway through that process, I was not making any headway with my writing. And I'd love to tell you, that I had a big, optimistic, outgoing spirit about all. I didn't. I was going like, oh, you're such a procrastinator. You haven't even started. The manuscript is due in 4.5 months. You haven't even begun. And I was kind of beating myself up. And I thought, I have clients calling. They want me to come give presentations. I can't get started. I got to get out. I got to do something. And I said to my wife, let's go to Hawaii. We'll get a condo. I'll take the laptop. We'll just go have 2 weeks of peace and tranquility. At that time, my daughter was 6 months old, little baby. I thought, perfect, I'll go and write. And my wife said, well, what do you plan to do? Just leave our daughter with the hotel babysitter or something? I go, oh, that's right. No, that wouldn't be good. My wife had 2 children from a former marriage, and they were being raised by their father. They lived in Canada. And I said, hey, I know what. Let's invite your 2 kids to come on the trip with us, because after all, they're teenagers now, and so they'll be able to help out caring for Kelsey. And I can get some work done. Oh, some of you have teenagers. Well, because I was not a full-time stepdad of these teens, I didn't really know about teenage behavior, so I said, oh, well, you're probably right. They may take a lot of attention, so I know what? Let's have each of them bring one of their teenage friends along. So the 4 teenagers, the baby, my wife, and I headed off to Hawaii for 2 weeks of peace and tranquility. I got nothing done. I had a terrible time. I mean, the whole time. Jesse would come up from the beach. He'd come to the front door of the condo. There was a little shower head down on the ground beside the front door to shower, wash your feet off. He'd look at it. He'd go into the middle of the living room. Say, boy, look at all this sand here. Then he'd brush it off on the carpet and he'd grind his heels in. Well, don't do that. Wash off outside. Then he'd head for the refrigerator and say, man, it's so hot. I'm really thirsty. He'd open the refrigerator. He'd see the glasses on the counter. He'd look in the refrigerator. There'd be that cardboard carton of guava juice. He would reach for the carton, belt it back, take every drop, and then, you know the kid. Then he'd put the empty carton back in the refrigerator, leave it open, turn and walk away. I mean, the whole time I'm going, pick up your towels, shower off outside, use the glass, be considerate. It was horrible. I had a terrible time. And I finally said, those teenagers have ruined this trip. I'm not getting anything done. I'm having a terrible time. And my wife was standing there with me, and she said, oh, that's interesting. Those teenagers are ruining your trip. Huh. And she started waggling these 3 fingers. Now let me tell you, if you write books about how to communicate positively, it is extremely annoying to be married to someone who has read them. Because waggling her fingers was her way of reminding me about a chapter I had written concerning one of my most important teachers, Edith Walther, my mom. That's my mom. On the left there, Edith. I remember when I didn't have a book report due one night. It was ready to be turned in the next morning, but I hadn't done it. My mom said, well, why isn't it done? You've had it for a week. And I pointed at my typewriter and said, the typewriter broke. I had this sort of a aqua coral-colored Smith Corona typewriter. I said, well, the typewriter broke. And my mom pointed at the typewriter and said, oh, I see one finger pointing at the typewriter, but look where the other 3 fingers are pointing. And she made me laboriously, she went through each finger. What does this finger say? That one says the typewriter broke. What's this one say? This one says I shouldn't have waited until the night before it was due. What does this one say? This one says I should have checked the typewriter to make sure it was working. And what about this one? This one says I should have had a backup plan in case the typewriter didn't work, some other way to get it turned in. In other words, it's not the typewriter's responsibility to get the book report done. Bring the responsibility back where it belongs. The teenagers didn't ruin my trip. My reaction to, obviously, what you're attesting to is normal teenage behavior, that's what ruined the trip. The 4th trait of power talkers is that they accept personal responsibility. You hear it in the way they speak. Powerless people say, I can't stand it. Why can't my leadership team get there on time? They're late for meetings. It throws off the whole schedule. They're bad. Power talkers pay attention to the 3 fingers pointing back at them and say, given that that's the fact, what can I do about the situation? Since people tend to be late for meetings, what can I do to alter my approach so that I can